I don't actually know who I am? What if, oh my goodness, any what if that you can possibly imagine, from things about your faith to harm to parenthood, to work with students, to contamination, to health, to safety, anything important to you. There is no limit for what those intrusive thoughts might look like.
Hey, and welcome back to another installment of the mental health series for our Analia podcast. You are in the Analia podcast, not in the studio, but you are listening where you're listening to the podcast, unless if you're watching the video, and then in terms of that, you're watching on YouTube. This has been a busy week for both Rebecca and I. So let me go ahead and bring her in.
Oh, hey everybody.
Yeah, I've been good about not doing that mute button. But yeah, so this at the time of this recording, this has been my first week of school, the data analytics boot camp, and by the time that this episode comes out, I will have completed my second week. It has been interesting. I've never attended class via Zoom. The last time I was in a formal education setting, I was, gosh, in my early 20s, and going to physical building, physical class. I was in there with other people in that moment. But Zoom is not too much different. It's it was a little bit strange the first time, but I'm sure other students who attended, class via Zoom during the whole pandemic, or just new to them, and some are still doing it virtually. But Becca, you are also going to be doing virtual classes soon.
I will be. Yeah, by the time this recording comes out, I will have completed my first week. So it's exciting. I don't, it's kind of hard to know exactly what to expect. Apparently it's an LMS is what it is, a learning management
Yeah.
system, which I am very familiar with because that's what I do at work, which is kind of funny. I was going through the like orientation stuff, and I noticed up at the top it said Articulate, and I was like, "Hey, I thought I recognized this format." That's Articulate is a program that you can use to create online courses, and yeah, it's a really neat program. But so yeah, it was kind of funny. I was like, wow, this feels very familiar to me, which is nice because I'm familiar with it through what I currently do. But yeah, both of us getting back into school. It's exciting.
Yeah, the new career path. So I'm gonna be a data analyst, and Becca is gonna be a LPC. So, well, again, your program is far more extensive than mine.
Yes, we're looking more
Becca,
at like 2.5 years
yeah,
rather than 3 months.
yeah, Becca is like, okay, slowly, gradually going along. I was like, boom, 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 boom. It's like crayon school almost. For those of you who watch anime, you probably have heard of that. I don't know that's a thing here in the U.S.
I mean, there's like after school programs,
Yeah,
so that
yeah,
would be equivalent, I think,
right,
like tutor
okay,
programs and things.
yeah. I know in anime they it's very exaggerated. It's like you gotta come to crayon school. We're gonna drag you back if you miss. Whereas in America, I mean, if you miss, no skin off their nose.
Well, I mean, if it's a after school program that your parents are paying for, then
Well, I mean, yeah, and then it's the parents that'll get on to you. But yeah. Anyway, all that aside, we're very pleased to have another guest with us. Again, this is our third installment of our mental health series. So, Becca, if you'll go ahead and introduce our guest for this week.
yeah. So today we actually have Reverend Katie O'Dunn. So, Katie, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And now I have all sorts of questions that I want to ask both of you about going back to school, because that just is so exciting with all that y'all are doing too. So I know we have
Well,
lots to
that's
talk
well, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, we can actually do that before we get to the actual interview questions. Katie, in your bio on your website, which is redkittyodone.com, And so you are an ordained minister, you're an interfaith chaplain, and you're an OCD advocate. So you're not a clinician, but you are an advocate for OCD. You're also an endurance athlete. I know I've seen like tons of videos and pictures on your Instagram of running, working out. So that's great. And you also specialize in the intersection between faith and mental health, which I think is much needed in today's culture. So, um, before we get to the interview questions, um, kind of give us um, a bit of a that well, yeah, okay, this is going to go into our first interview question. Sorry. Okay. Um, Tell us like, a little bit about how you grew up, your background.
Yeah, so I grew up actually in Maryland. So I live in Atlanta now, but I mean, there were a couple different sides of my life going on that feed into what's going on now. In terms of OCD, I navigated symptoms of OCD from before I can even remember. And every time I talk about it, I like folks to know that it's not the cute, quirky organizational stuff that we tend to see in the media, that it's typically defined by intrusive thoughts and compulsions, either physical or mental, to alleviate the distress that comes up from those intrusive thoughts. And for me, that was pretty prevalent from the time I was 5 or 6. Some of my earliest things related to over responsibility. And even as a first grader, I remember very much feeling like I needed to do everything in the classroom in a particular way because I was fearful that if I didn't, essentially I worried that the sun would get too close to the earth and it would be my fault and the world would be destroyed and it would all be because of me, which is a lot of pressure on a
Yes.
first grader.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
and so throughout my life, OCD came up in different ways. I never really got the effective treatment that I needed, which is pretty common for individuals with OCD. And I was someone who was incredibly high functioning. So I was excelling in school. I was excelling in running as an endurance athlete. But OCD was internally something that was really plaguing me. And over time, I got very skilled at masking of living out my life while doing 15 or 20 hours of really mental compulsions a day to feel like I was keeping myself, my family, everyone around me safe. Um, by the time I got to my Master of Divinity, which I was doing at Emory to pursue ministry, which I very much felt called to in a lot of different ways that we'll talk about today, kind of how that shifted and changed. My OCD kind of latched on to everything. I was in my early 20s. I was moving through seminary, again, looking like I had it all together, also competing in a high level with running and triathlon. But I was up all night checking ovens, stoves, locks, driving back to churches where I was interning to make sure things were unplugged, to make sure everyone was safe, to make sure I hadn't caused harm. And at the time, I shared with a mentor that I thought I might have OCD, that I thought that might be what was going on because of a dual degree I was doing with the School of Public Health. And unfortunately, I was told at that time that I shouldn't share that with anyone because it would impact my psych evaluations for ministry and that I needed to keep that quiet. So I did, which is now very different advice than I give others that I work with.
Right.
Um, and I kept it quiet. I continued to push that down and moved right out of seminary at age 25 into my first large role in ministry, where I was the academy chaplain for 2,700 awesome students from different faith backgrounds. And I was coming in as the first female in the role, and also at age 25 when my predecessor had been there for 25 years. So there was all of this pressure, which OCD loves to say, hey, it's really important. Don't mess this up. Okay. You have to do this right. And OCD ultimately for me latched on to everything under the sun related to my job, related to my students. To give just a fast forward to how that got me to where I am now, I was in that role for 7 years. I very much loved it. But OCD also took over my life in the first few years in that role. And particularly around a period where I lost other individuals in my life to mental health struggles. My OCD latched onto that, particularly to the loss of students that I was supporting the community through. And I hit rock bottom with my OCD. I was very fortunate to finally get the right evidence-based treatment for OCD, exposure and response prevention that I'll talk about some today. And it saved my life. It helped me to reclaim my life. It actually helped me to start living out again the big, beautiful life that God had given me to live, as opposed to living in the box that OCD had put me in. And coming out of that experience, I didn't want to be quiet about my story anymore, not just for me, but because of what I had been told, the amount of times that I had been told, oh, you're a minister, you can't tell anyone, really for my students from all different faith backgrounds who felt like they weren't able to share what they were experiencing within their faith communities. So I started sharing my story, and the opposite of everything I thought happened. I started hearing from families saying like, oh, wait, can we actually talk to you about what's going on? And how do we talk with our priest, with our rabbi, with our imam? So it opened a whole door for me that ultimately led to a very big life shift to doing work in faith and mental health full time.
Wow, that's awesome. What an incredible story of, God really using something that you felt was so shaming. And so you needed to like keep it locked up and keep it inside, when it's just like it was more of an invitation to share your struggle, and so that other people could open up as well. I think that's so amazing that God would do that and just use you in that way. And I think he's doing that with a lot of people. I think a lot of people now are starting to open up more about mental health. And I don't know if it's just because like I'm paying attention more or if it's really changing, but it's certainly a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always tell folks I get a question a lot about, where is God in the midst of all of this? And I definitely don't have all of the answers for why we sometimes need to struggle, why we struggle the way that we do. But I deeply believe that God gives us incredible opportunities to create beauty out of brokenness and to sometimes put pieces back together in ways that we never could have expected without these experiences and without God walking alongside us. And yes, I will be honest, I would not want to go back and have some of those experiences again that I had with my OCD.
Yeah.
But in the place that I am now, I am just so tremendously grateful for the journey, because it feels like a gift from God each day to be able to do the work that I love doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you were talking about putting the pieces back together in a beautiful way, I just got the picture of a stained glass window of where you have these whole sheets of glass that have to be broken in order to be put into these beautiful, beautiful arrangements of colored glass. And it's even more beautiful than when it was, quote unquote whole, if you will. And yeah, we're all like that. We're all a mosaic or stained glass windows.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Reminds me that for those of you who listen to early 2000s Christian music and youth group, that reminds me of that Super Chick song, Beauty from the Pain.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, I lived on that song.
I remember that.
Yes, I went through a very difficult time in my life at the end of high school, very end, as I'm graduating, upheaval in my family, and I latched onto that song with everything that I had. I think it was on repeat during that time in my life, and it's such a great song.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, okay, that's a great story. It gets such an insight because I think, in the church, especially where I grew up, mental health was not talked a lot, talked about a lot, um, because I think people in leadership in the church, whether it's pastor, associate pastor, reverend, what have you, um, it's like you have to have a image that looks like you have it all together, that you aren't dealing with everything because God has put you and appointed you to this position that is only for people who have it together, and that's not the case. I remember growing up where I had, these rituals because I felt that, it was instilled within me that God would not favor or love me if I did not read a chapter of the Bible a day, if I didn't go to youth group, if that I didn't attend Sunday service, that I didn't have quiet or prayer time. It was more like a checklist and obligation rather than wanting to. So, yeah.
You are so describing actually the work now that I do with folks every day. And I love what you described as a checklist as opposed to kind of this desire to connect. So
Right.
when I started advocating for OCD, I was very familiar with the themes that I had always had and very familiar with student chaplaincy and with clinical chaplaincy, but less about kind of the intersection between faith and OCD. And as I started advocating, I started hearing from clinics and treatment providers really all over the world asking for help because I had taught comparative religions. I had worked with students of different faith backgrounds for a long time, asking me for help on religious scrupulosity cases, which now I know is a subtype of OCD where the obsessions and compulsions actually relate to faith, where someone might feel like, oh, I have to do this in a perfect way. I have to pray repetitively. I have to do this because of
Yeah.
guilt, shame, fear, and anxiety
Yes.
versus meaning and connection to God. And so now actually my work full time is in that area where I don't work on the clinical side, but on the faith side with religious scrupulosity cases where I help individuals figure out what's faith from what's OCD and how can we get back to this meaningful, authentic, joyful relationship with God. And I bridge the gap kind of between clinicians and faith leaders for folks who are walking that journey.
Wow, that is so interesting, and so awesome that there's someone like you doing that kind of work to be that in between of someone who is, I don't know, someone who can, I don't know, talk both languages, I guess,
Yeah.
because that can be so difficult to know how to navigate, particularly for people who, their faith is a whole like part of them, I don't know, that's just it's kind of hard to say, but like it's so important, like for some people it's just a thing that you do, and it's not that important to them, and that's okay, um but for other people it's like it's your life. This is who I am. This is not just like what I do, it's who I am. And putting OCD on top of that is like, oh, so even so much harder. Yeah,
Well,
it's
and
so
with,
much
with
harder.
OCD themes, I always tell folks it latches on. The theme really at the end of the day is irrelevant, but the disorder latches on to whatever is significant to the sufferer. So it
Mm,
makes sense that for people where their faith is
yeah.
really important, their theme will probably be about their faith. And it's still something so significant to them. And it's so important. It's tough when clinicians are developing their treatments and what that looks like for exposures. It's so important on the faith side, and that's what I love doing to help individuals have an understanding of what that faith looks like, so a person can be respected in that, so that they can do the exposures and the treatment that they need to do, but still get closer to their faith as a part of that process. And I do so. My doctoral research is around viewing treatment for OCD as a spiritual practice, because I actually believe
Mm,
that as we engage in these treatments, we get to reconnect with God. We get to kind of stop worshiping OCD and get back to our
mhm.
faith in a meaningful, value driven way.
Yeah, absolutely. We can turn, I believe that we are spiritual beings
Mhm.
and that we will worship something. And it's just where is our time and attention going to? For people with OCD, it goes towards that, like you were just saying. And so yeah, let's like recenter. Let's get
Mhm.
back to what is really important to us, because obviously the OCD, like you said, latched onto what was important to you, and somehow it turned into all about OCD rather than your faith,
Mhm.
when that's what's important to you. So how to get back to that. So
Mhm.
that's so interesting. Um, so and we noticed, well, obviously your title is Reverend. And I'm just really curious about how, and this could go into a whole deep conversation, so we won't spend too much time on it. But I'm sure you faced opposition in ministry as a woman reverend.
Mhm.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah, I mean, so early on, it's actually really interesting. And the opposition from a gender perspective, I'm in a denomination that is very supportive of females in ministry, so I've not faced that in quite a while. But it's interesting that when I first got into ministry, actually in college, it was through I was a collegiate runner. Long story short, I had a pretty major stress fracture and started working with students who were in foster care with a cross country team, and ended up having this pretty profound ministry and call experience where I decided to change my majors to religious studies and human services. I felt very called to do something related to God and related to bringing people to God. And the church that I was going to at the time, I was so excited at the time. I guess I was like 18 or 19, and I was like, I'm going to go to ministry. I'm going to go to seminary. And I remember being told, well, you're a female, so that's not really in the cards for you. And that just being a completely crushing initially experience of feeling like I couldn't be called in that area because of my gender. And it actually ended up giving me a really huge passion in that area, where the rest of my time in college at Elon, I did all of my religious studies projects around kind of reimagining the writings of Paul and seeking to understand the voice of women in ministry. And that became a really large passion for me moving forward into seminary as well. And now that really carries into the space. I'm ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is very affirming kind of across the board in ministry. But my real passion and my work over the last decade has been interfaith chaplaincy, where I get to work with individuals from all different faith backgrounds. And I've had so many experiences of pushes and pulls, actually more so in that area of folks really struggling with the fact that I work with folks with so many different faith traditions. And I've generally come back to this idea of the expansive, just beautiful nature of God, where we get to have all of these beautifully wonderful, unique individuals that I get to work with who worship God in beautiful and unique ways. And I feel so honored to get to be with them as a chaplain and as a minister on that journey.
Okay. Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Yes, absolutely. So, um, it's when you were saying that, yeah, I'm gonna go to seminary, and somebody said basically the equivalent, I thought you can't because you're a girl. Um, and the back in like the 90s, 80s, especially in the 50s, there were designated roles for men and women. And I feel that was very limiting for a lot of people because it's like, oh, well, in just to use a example, like in Disney, they had like women who would apply for the animation department, and they would basically get that rejection letter saying, no, we only have men in the animation department, but we have a part that's space for you in the paint department. Um, but yeah, so I felt like even women who work in IT was like a big revelation to me because that was is kind of still is a male dominated field. But I like how, regardless of, gender, that people are pursuing careers no matter boy, girl, whatever.
Well, and male or female, we all have a responsibility to take care of the people in the church, I think,
Yes.
and people in general, of course. So we can minister. Yeah, we can all have those conversations.
Nice. All right, and our last question here. We've been asking this of all of our guests for this series. In regards to self-care, what do you do in your own life for self-care?
Yeah. So this one, I always when I answer this, folks are like, "Huh, that's self-care, seriously?" But so I'm an ultra marathon runner, and I actually find a really big connection even to God in the midst of that. And so when I was in seminary, kind of the first time around, my research was specifically around reimagining actually endurance athletics as a spiritual practice, and I found this really big connection between running and prayer and connecting with God and self-care and recharging and feeling connected to something so beautiful beyond ourselves. And that continues to be a huge component of what I do, but now it has shifted into something a little bit larger. I am racing right now an ultra marathon in every state. So those are all races that are means longer than a marathon, and they're all trail races, so 30 to 100-mile races. And in each state, I'm fundraising for an individual who is seeking OCD treatment who can't afford it. So it becomes this neat component for me to get to train and race all over the country, which feels so much like self care. But there's also this really neat component of being able to give back in doing it. And the motto I use as a part of that is running towards my values, which from an acceptance and commitment therapy component with mental health is all about continuing to move towards everything important to us, no matter how challenging things are. And I think for me, the self care comes with every run. Or I had an ultra marathon last weekend that was hot as anything and was one of the more painful ones I've done. And I kept thinking, well, what does it mean to put one foot in front of the other, no matter how I'm feeling? And in the midst of those races, it reminds me to continue to do that in life, in my mental health journey, and in faith.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because it's something that you're really passionate about. And, I think fanning the flames of your passions is part of self-care. So I love that you mentioned that. Like I love painting. That was what my undergrad was in, was fine art painting. And I've recently been getting back into it. And I'm like, oh man, I just love it so much. What's funny is what I love most about it is the movement. So like large scale art is what I love because it's like a dance. I can just move my body and then watch how the colors come together because I love abstract painting. And so, you know, fanning that flame of that passion is, I don't know, it makes you come alive. It makes you feel alive. And that's such a good thing. It's like, so I love that. I know I've been recently, I think I've talked about this on the past couple episodes that we've done for mental health, but recently figured out that because the media and social media, all of that, they tell you it's skincare routines and getting a blowout for your hair,
Or
and it's
bubble
like
baths, stuff like
yeah,
that.
it's a lot of primping and preening, and those are all good things. It's not bad, but like it's so much more than that. It's literally just taking care of yourself, self-care. When I like broke it down that way, I was like, oh, light bulb. I get it. When I brush my teeth, that's self-care.
Take a
When
shower.
I take a shower,
Self-care.
that's self-care.
Yeah,
When I go paint, that's self-care. So,
it's so important, and especially even going back to self-compassion, which we tend to,
yeah.
especially in mental health conversations, have such a hard time with. Pretty much everyone I work with is great at being nice to everyone around them, but not necessarily being nice to themselves. And I think anything where we are able to give ourselves the same love and compassion that we do those around us, or see ourselves through the same loving eyes through which God sees us, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think in that regard, self-care very much is spiritual too. I talk often about loving our neighbors as ourselves, and this being a call from Christ, where we often forget the as ourselves piece. And in
Yeah,
order to actually love our neighbors, well, it doesn't say be mean to your neighbors the way that you would be
Yeah.
to yourself. There's this element of needing to care for yourself as a part of that journey.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important to do that. I had a revelation earlier this week. Um, I was reading a comic online and it just made me think though, it was all about like bullies and people being mean to you and like accepting who you are. And I just realized in that moment reading that comic, I was like, wow, I never had external bullies telling me you're fat, you're ugly, no one's ever going to like you. Like external people didn't tell me that. I was telling myself that. And I was my biggest bully. And so I don't know, that was just kind of like a huge revelation. I'm like, okay, I need to not be a bully to myself. Um
I mean,
That's not
Especially
yeah,
when you're
nice.
the one who's with you all the time, right?
yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
trying to do that. I'm with me all the time, but
Yeah.
I'm mean to myself in my head. That doesn't work out well.
Right. Exactly.
yeah. I mean, it's like the song, making another reference here. That song that band lit is no surprise to me that I am my own worst enemy.
Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Yeah, it's that song really is. It is such a great example of this.
It is.
they're oh, what is it? The Holderness family. For those of you who are into like, for those of you who, like, consume like family clean content, they're a great resource.
They do a lot of song parodies
Yeah,
about like family and life and stuff.
right.
They're funny. I like them.
They actually did a parody um, where it's no surprise to me that I have ADHD. So that was a very nice parody. Um, so for our listeners, if this talk about OCD is sounding familiar, well, it is because we actually talked about OCD during last year's mental health series. And Katie, you were actually referred to us by licensed mental health counselor Carly Samek, who we discussed Inside Out with. We encourage you all, if you haven't heard that, go back and listen to that episode. We had a great conversation, just like we're going to have a great conversation with you, Katie. So, Katie, what are we going to be? Sorry, what are we going to be talking about today?
So I am really, really excited to talk about Monsters Inc., which has been one of just my favorites forever, and that I had the pleasure of rewatching last night with so much joy and enthusiasm. And was thinking about when you all reached out to me to be on this podcast, what I might, what cartoon, what film I might want to link with mental health. And I think OCD sometimes can be tricky, and that's what I talk about a lot because it's not often portrayed in the media in a way that is super respectful or really super accurate.
Right.
So the reason I picked Monsters Inc. is I actually think it does a fantastic job of describing the treatment for OCD and reframing that in a really fun way. So I'm excited to be talking about that today.
Awesome. And it looks like from the notes and from what we discussed with Beck and I, because when we were watching it, it's like, well, how's this about OCD, mental health? But when you take into account of intrusive thoughts, it makes perfect sense. So for those of you who, again, don't know what Monsters Inc. is,
Which
I,
would be
I,
surprising,
I
but
could be nice and tell you a synopsis. Um, but I won't. Just go watch it.
Oh, good.
It's about
Also,
it's
part of
about
this, it
yeah,
just makes you smile. Yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah,
does.
exactly. It's about monsters, and it's not in the scary way. It's good for all ages. Take an afternoon, take an evening, check it out. So this revolves around our three main characters. We have Michael Zowski, we have JP Sullivan, and we have Boo, which is, again, not her real name, but it's the name that is given to her and that she's recognized by. This is in the Disney universe where monsters have jobs, they have lives, just like people in day-to-day world. And their main source for what we use as energy is electricity, and that's powered by fossil fuels and all that. Well, for their main source of energy, it is the screens and the fear of mainly children. And when you're talking about intrusive thoughts, that fits perfectly because intrusive thoughts can create anxiety, they can create fear. So, Katie, give us a little bit more explanation about intrusive thoughts and how they relate to this film, Monsters Inc., and why this is a perfect depiction of this topic.
Yeah. Intrusive thoughts, I always like to, and going back, of course, if folks listen to the episode with Carly, I'm sure she describes this beautifully. But intrusive thoughts at the end of the day are just thoughts. So we have a ton of thoughts that flow through our mind throughout the day just because of associations that we make. And some of those thoughts are happy, some are sad, and some might be intrusive just because of the things that are the most important to us. I always tell folks it doesn't mean that they have any more value, but they might be a little bit scary because of those things that are significant. And very similarly, in Monsters Inc., we have really this story of monsters walking through particular children's doors in order to scare them, in order to evoke this level of scream, so that, as you said, they can power kind of this community. And I think it's really interesting because intrusive thoughts in our community are often seen as monsters, are often seen as something that's walking through your bedroom door, your closet door with these big giant claws and with screams, in a way that's the most significant to you. And in the film, it's really funny because each kid, when I noticed that going back and watching last night, has kind of their own monster, and each
Right.
monster is a little bit different. And it's the same with OCD. Intrusive thoughts are different based on what might be scary to each person.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because like when we meet Boo, she shows a picture to Sully that looks like Randall. It's like, oh, Randall is your monster. He's been your monster for however long, and when you say we each do have our own monster, again, it differs from the intrusive thoughts that you have, the type of things that you deal with OCD, and just it seems that that monster grows and grows and grows to the size of Sully. Then the more you fester, the more you feed into those intrusive thoughts, because it starts out with that little bit of truth that gets distorted into a lie, and it just grows and grows and grows. Um, but with intrusive thoughts, um, in your profession, what are maybe kind of like the range of intrusive thoughts that you have that you've experienced either for yourself or from people that you've worked with?
Yeah. So intrusive thoughts, and I always like to start by saying are ego dystonic for individuals with OCD, which means they directly oppose what is the most significant or what is a core value of the sufferer. And kind of like the kind of funny thing is they always feel really, really dangerous. Kind of like the children felt like they were actually in danger in Monsters
Mhm.
Inc., but in
Right.
reality, the monsters weren't really going to
Yes.
harm them. It's kind of this false alarm system that goes off alongside our intrusive thoughts, trying to keep us safe, but it's not anything that's actually a danger. And it can range. Well, we say intrusive thoughts can be about anything. Obsessions and OCD can be about anything. And I see that in the form of, what if I'm a bad person? What if I'm contaminated? What if I committed a crime and forgot? What if I sinned against God and don't know it? What if I am a bad parent? What if I'm spiritually contaminated? What if I don't actually know who I am? What if, oh my goodness, any what if that you can possibly imagine, from things about your faith to harm to parenthood, to work with students, to contamination, to health, to safety, anything important to you, there is no limit for what those intrusive thoughts might look like.
Hmm.
Yeah, and kind of on the other side of that, when you said that children are fearful that monsters are actually going to harm them, that kind of transfers, I guess, into OCD in the way that um, being like, oh, I'm going to be contaminated if I touch a child and I, have something stuck on me or touch something from the human world. And it's just so funny that, these are scary monsters, shouldn't be scared of anything, but yet they are fear of, a child because, a 2319 is going to be called and the CDA is going to come from the rafters and the windows.
And they
Um,
literally think they're gonna die.
yeah.
Oh,
Like,
it's adorable. I mean, it's
yeah,
scary for them, but it's kind of
Yeah.
adorable that a sock is hanging off and
Yeah.
it's like,
right.
oh, bring everybody in.
Yep.
Right.
Well, and that's the other piece with OCD then, of where this comes in, of how I really feel like this connects, because one, we have this intrusive thought side that's similar to monsters, and we even have folks in our community. Sean Shinnick is a great example that does draw your monster, which is really neat, where folks actually can draw sketches of their OCD as a monster, which is very cool. So there's a lot of things around this. But then there's the treatment for OCD. And I know Carly, I'm sure, talked about this, but exposure and response prevention
Yes.
is seen as that gold standard treatment for OCD, which involves an individual being exposed to their fears while not engaging in the ritual response, not doing something that decreases that anxiety. And the really interesting thing with ERP, the most effective way to do it is actually showing OCD that we're not afraid of the content. And often we'll even use non-engagement responses that can be really silly. So when the what if thought pops up, what if I'm a bad person? We might practice just even pretending that we aren't afraid of OCD and saying, yeah, maybe, but I'm going to continue on with my day. And I always have this image when we use our non-engagement responses of OCD almost shrinking and becoming kind of fearful of us. It starts to shrink down. It has less power when we're not feeding into it. And a lot of times in ERP, there'll even be a lot of practices where individuals will practice saying things out loud that are even scarier than what the OCD is saying, where they'll one up the OCD without responding to it. And I imagine this very much in the same way of the monsters that come in that look really frightening, that aren't actually all that dangerous. And when a kid responds and says, I'm not afraid of you, that the monster actually gets terrified, runs out of the room, typically is decontaminated in some way. And I imagine that as the response almost that OCD gives to us when we refuse to engage with the really scary content. This sense of, cool, okay, I can deal with a monster hanging out in my room and the OCD monster turning around and saying, okay, I don't have anything left. I'm afraid of your non-engagement response. I'm not going to do anything anymore. And it's such a great metaphor because it really is what happens throughout the ERP journey with OCD. The more we refuse to engage, the more we show fear to the OCD, it gets smaller and we get to reclaim our lives. We ultimately get to, like in the movie, have the door shredded because we're no longer someone who can be afraid by that OCD, be made afraid by that OCD monster.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, I'm like, wow, this is a really great picture. I struggled a little bit while we were watching it. I was like, how are we going to talk about mental health with this? I was also really sleepy when we were watching it. So
well, we went to American Barrel last night, so and well, yeah.
Yeah.
We had a good time. It was a nice night out. And a great movie to watch. So I have here in your notes, the leap of faith during treatment. Can you kind of delve a little bit more detail into that?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little on the OCD side and then how it applies to
Okay.
Monsters Inc.
Sure.
So the faith is such a huge component when someone is navigating OCD treatment because there is a big level of uncertainty of what does it mean if I allow these scary thoughts to be here? What does it mean if I allow the OCD monster to be here? Is something horrible going to happen? And yet the only way to actually get better from the disorder is to allow that to be there without engaging with it. That takes a leap of faith. It takes a really big leap of faith to let everything that you're afraid of kind of sit right in front of your face while you don't respond to it. I often respond. I often tell when I'm with kiddos, I often tell them that it literally feels like there's a bear kind of standing in front of your face, and you're being asked to say, "Cool, okay, I'm not afraid of you. It's fine. You can be here." And that takes a leap of faith. It takes a really big leap of faith to not run away screaming, whatever that intrusive thought or intrusive feeling is for you. I often say on the faith side that treatment for OCD involves kind of a trinity of treatment that involves faith in God, faith in yourself, that you can in fact do this, and faith in your treatment journey, that all of these things fit together as a part of taking this leap to say, you know what, this is probably OCD, no matter how scary it is. I am willing to risk all of the scary stuff in favor of the big, beautiful life that God created me to live. And this is very similar to what we see happening in the film. We see Sully and Boo's kind of trust and bravery lead to positive outcomes, we kind of have to see Sully have to take this leap of faith that Boo isn't actually all that dangerous and isn't necessarily going to contaminate or kill him. And likewise, Boo has to take some leaps of faith, even in seeing some places that Sully looks a little scary, that Sully actually is the big, kind kitty cat that she believes that he is. And in taking those leaps of faith and trusting one another, Boo ends up being able to go home. And we also see this really beautiful positive outcome where children's laughter is found to power everything so much more beautifully than
Yes.
fear. And I think we see so many scenes in the movie of actual leaps from door to door that are floating around, and all of these scenes where these leaps of faith are required to get to the end, where there is this beauty that really comes out of some of the brokenness that we see in the fear throughout the film.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is that, rather than the screams being, yeah, they've got power, but when you laugh, there's so much more power and so much more beauty in the laughter than there was in the scream.
Yeah.
And just that we can also go through our lives smiling and laughing, and that gives so much more power to who we are, our personalities, and the impact that we can have on the world.
Mm, absolutely. It's funny, and I wasn't thinking about this before with the ERP ties, but a lot of times I'll tell clients, because this was my experience, that giving ourselves permission to experience joy is actually the biggest exposure of all. And it's because a lot of individuals with OCD experience extreme guilt and shame for their intrusive thoughts, or feel like they aren't worthy of getting better. That was very much my experience for a long time. I felt like I didn't deserve to get better. I'm navigating this, and what does this mean about me? And it's actually, you see pink in my office right now. I wear a lot of pink and love pink, favorite color. But one of the reasons I love it is when I was struggling so deeply with OCD, I felt like I wasn't allowed to wear pink, which was very distorted thinking. But I felt like I couldn't wear anything that brought me joy because I didn't deserve it. And one of my big exposures in the midst of intrusive thoughts was actually giving myself permission to wear pink, to wear things that made me smile, to do things that made me laugh. And it was one of the biggest kind of exposures and also response prevention components with OCD of whenever an intrusive thought popped up, to be able to say, great, I am going to enjoy this life that God has given me anyway. And that laughter, that joy, that connection with others can conquer the fear in such a beautiful way is really exactly what we see here. Of it's so much more powerful than fear. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to give yourself that grace when you think, oh, I can't wear my favorite color. I can't laugh. I can't have joy because of A, B, C, or D. And really, you have to give yourself grace because you are worthy of having joy and laughing and enjoying life. To kind of bring this all into perspective, when we're talking about fear and why we should not fear, there's a great verse in Psalm 23:4. Even though, and I'll kind of relate this to intrusive thoughts and OCD, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so when you're having these intrusive thoughts and you're going through OCD, when you're walking through it, and if you're a Christian believer, you ultimately have nothing to fear. God has taken that burden. As you said in last week's episode, cast your burdens on the Lord. He'll give you strength. And just like this, you're going to walk through trials. You're going to walk through tribulations. You're going to walk through some of these dark times, but He is with you, even though it may not seem like it. He is with you. Becca, with your thoughts on, Monsters Inc., fear, OCD, intrusive thoughts, I know that you've had, continuous, intrusive thoughts that because you are a certain way, you don't feel like you deserve some things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I've talked about it on here, probably, but
Mhm.
yeah, I have felt that, like, because I am overweight, because I am larger, I don't deserve love. And that's just like a ingrained belief system that I have. I'm about to start counseling actually to try to dive into that and do some cognitive behavioral therapy and all of that to help push through that, because it's really um, I mean it's controlled my life for so long. Really made helped me make the choices that I've made, basically. So, so yeah, that's some things I'm dealing with.
I want to reach through the computer right now and give you a hug and tell you you are
Oh,
beautiful and amazing and you are
Oh,
um I I resonate so much with not feeling enough in different ways, and you are created with so much love, and I can say that to you in ways that I have trouble saying to myself, but I just you're amazing.
thank you. Thank you. And it is so hard when, like, it's hard because it's so easy to give that and say that to someone else and truly
right.
believe it and
Mean it.
mean it. And then you look at yourself and you're like, yeah, but you're the exception.
Yeah,
And it's
like
like,
yeah, like I was
but
telling
it's not true.
Becca the other day, I tell you you're beautiful, you're the voluptuous, you're all these things till I'm blue in the face, but I can't make you believe that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I do a lot of, especially with OCD self-compassion work with clients, and we do a lot of work around, especially if there are cognitive distortions around how we see ourselves. I have a lot of folks put their hands on their heart and say all sorts of things about themselves, but through the framework of God created me to be kind. God created me in a beautiful way. I am so proud that God made me an amazing painter or artist, and being able to name, God sees me in this way and I can see myself in this way too. And some of my clients, when I ask them to do that, especially my younger clients, will look at me and be like, Chaplain K, seriously, do I have to put my hand on my heart and say nice things about myself? And we'll do it. And it's like, wait, maybe I really am those things. Maybe God really does see me in that way. And there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, okay, we have enjoyed so much, talking about OCD, intrusive thoughts in relations to monsters, and getting to know more about you. Again, we could go in so much depth about this, but for time's sake, of course, we do have to keep it contained. Um, but if people want to follow you, keep up with what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, so folks can head over on Instagram. I'm at RevK Runs Beyond OCD, or they can reach out to me through my website at revkatiodunn.com. And I am always happy to connect on all things faith, OCD, running, and honestly, even self-compassion as a spiritual practice. So I just feel free to always reach out. And I always like everyone to know I'm really honored wherever you are in the journey. I'm honored to be on the journey with you.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Well, next week will be our last installment of our mental health series, so
I can't
be
believe
sure
it's
to tune
almost
in.
already done almost.
Yeah, almost, almost. All right. Well, until next week, and until next time, keep those halos shiny and stay holy, my friends.